Thank you, Kelly, as well, and everyone else who's been sharing so many good things. Are you guys feeling filled up? Are your brains full? My other background is in teaching, including primary teaching, and if this was a classroom, I'd get you to stand up and do a brain break. You'd probably wave your arms around in the air or something. Won't ask you to do that right now. But hopefully, did someone say, please do, wake me up? Wake me up. Good to be here. Last night I shared that I come from a Wabakul country. That's where I live and work. And so it's good to be here on this country as well today. Thanks for having me. About 2 years ago, I woke up my whole family to go and look at some art at 4 a.m. And I bribed them with croissants and hot chocolates. We packed the car and drove in procession with all the other 4 a.m. art pilgrims. 4 a.m., well, some people might say it feels like a hellish hour, but I think it feels a bit like a holy hour, reverent, because people are still talking in whispers as they trickle out of their cars. You can tell that people are shutting their doors like just enough to click. And we join the stream of people who are walking from the car park to a showground, carrying picnic blankets and picnic baskets and thermoses of hot drinks. They're all wrapped up in rugs and beanies. There's just enough lights around to keep us safe but not disturb the night. And we're all here to see Patricia Piccinini's sky whales, sky whale and sky whale papa, a giant hot air balloon family of strange, imagined creature sculptures that explore themes of family, nurture, connection, community, and diversity. Now, Piccinini is known for her work that's very unexpected. Her work raises more questions than it answers, and she notes that we actually have a word that we're all quite familiar with for the fear of difference, xenophobia. But we don't really talk about the love of difference. And she's most well known for her hyper-realist sculptures of these almost human creatures and somewhat familiar animals that often appear really, really bizarre at first. But the more you look at them, the more comforting and less abnormal they become. We look at them a little bit longer and they start to become familiar. We start to recognize common relationship narratives, and she helps us question our prejudices and find connection with things that at first appeared very different and perhaps a little frightening to us. She starts with what-if questions, like, what if whales floated in the sky? The first sculpture was the sky whale, and it explored imagination, the wonders of nature and diversity, but not a lot of people liked it. It was a bit strange, too weird, too bulbous. But over time, attitudes softened as people got used to this sky whale and affection grew, especially when she added the second sky whale Papa, because now it resembled a family and the father is carrying around 9 babies, keeping them safe. Piccinini says this: it's a really good indication of how people can open up their hearts to something that they might find a bit suspicious or a bit strange. It does kind of take an emotional engagement to come into the ideas, engage with them, and then actually open your heart to them. That's a journey. This viewing, this performance, this flight, because that's what it is. It's really an art performance, watching these sky whales come to life. It's actually called Every Heart Sings, because the artist knew that an experience like this was something very extraordinary, to gather people together outside at 4 a.m, because you've got to get up really early to go and watch a hot air balloon be inflated. It's very different to going and seeing an artwork in a gallery. There's communal anticipation, commitment to come at dawn, and the risk that it might all be for naught because hot air balloons don't always get to fly, right? The conditions have to be exactly perfect. So this is actually an artwork for people who hope. The parameters for a normal hot air balloon flight are very specific. But have a bit of a think about the complexities for a flight of a hot air balloon sculpture engineered with this sort of appendage. Sky whale is 35 metres high, 23 metres wide. Sky whale papa, the other one, is even taller. And we got to meet with the artist, or I got to meet with the artist later that day, and she described the design process, the engineering, all of the problems that they had, what happened when they tried to fly it, and how difficult it is to fly. That you need a very, very skilled balloonist, and the basket will only hold that one person because it is far too dangerous to have a bigger basket and have more people have passengers for this particular type of hot air balloon. It is a sculpture, not just a hot air balloon. So here we all were waiting for the flight of the sky whales, knowing that it might not even happen. It was going to be something of a miracle to get to see the full artistic expression. And I remember looking around at the many scattered picnic rugs that morning, now bathed in earliest morning light. We'd actually all been in lockdowns on and off for about 18 months. And for many, this was the first large community gathering. Here we were emerging together at dawn, together looking, together waiting for something a bit new and different, hoping that this wouldn't be another disappointment. And the longer we all looked, the less strange they became, the more beautiful they became. And we watched them come to life. And then they soared. Sky whale and sky whale papa, extraordinary and peculiar. Like, let's be honest, they're pretty weird. Monumental, magnificent, marvellous, mammals in the sky. Mysterious, yes, possibly even a bit miraculous. And we watched them make their way off into the distance, floating over unsuspecting rural Maitland. And we wonder who might be lucky enough to glimpse a sky whale on their morning walk and be incredibly shocked and confused. Picasso famously said, "Art washes away from the soul the dust of everyday life." And we love that. We nod and agree, right? We love the beautiful art that elevates and inspires and brings great joy to us. Those possibilities of new creation, something made that was previously not made, materials transformed into something new. There's a lot of theological parallels, right? And I've spent more than a decade talking about theology of recreation. Some of you might have heard me talk about it before. I've often quoted the work of a contemporary philosopher named Elaine Scarry. And she says, beautiful things have a forward momentum, the way they incite the desire to bring new things into the world. Infants, epics, sonnets, drawings, dances, laws, philosophical dialogues, theological tracts. And she talks about how beauty decenters us, takes us out of ourselves, and then creates a desire to be part of creating other beautiful things. We see beauty, we want to create more beauty in the world. She says this, something beautiful fills the mind, yet invites the search for something beyond itself, something larger. We love that. The beautiful things, the art that elevates, that's inspiring. And that's what faith is for too, right? We love faith that elevates, that inspires, and is beautiful. But we also recognise and value difficult art. We know it's important. You know, the challenging art, the weird stuff, the peculiar stuff, the ugly and sometimes grotesque and confronting art. Sure, I'm probably not going to hang it in my house, but I know that it's really important. Yeah? I know that those stories need to be told so that artists can grieve, so that collectively as a community we can grieve. We need art that challenges, that is protest, that's a way of sharing suffering. We need art that prophetically highlights things that we might be ignoring or just be ignorant about. We get that. Art is allowed to be weird. We've kind of come to just accept that that's how it's going to be because it's human expression. I often say art is an expression that helps us understand ourselves, each other, and the world better. And I think faith is the same thing, an expression that helps us understand ourselves, each other, and the world better. But where's the weird, uncomfortable, difficult faith expressions? Have we made space for those too? We need our art and our faith to not always be beautiful. In fact, for me, it's now actually the difficult art that's teaching me the most about faith and what might be a fuller or more sustainable or more honest faith. I read an article recently examining the collision of ideas around the purpose of contemporary art and what societies actually expect to get from it. What do societies actually want from contemporary art? And what's the difference in particular between open societies and authoritarian societies in their expectation of contemporary art? And Ulai Sij actually describes contemporary art as our pain, mostly analytical and critical. It puts its finger in the wound and doesn't show an ideal world, but rather reality or what artists take that to be. We understand that we can't just always have the uplifting art. That it's actually a problem if we try to censor art and only show the art that holds up particular ideals. If you know anything about Western or European art history, you'll know that there's been numerous attempts to limit and control human expression. There's been times when art establishments have tried to set up a single universal visual narrative or ultimate art movement, the most correct kind of art, one art to rule them all. Never works. Doesn't end well. You know, the difficult art might come with a warning sign in the gallery, but it doesn't get hidden. It's still there. It's there for us to look at it and learn from. I need to be able to express the doubting and the anger and the grieving parts of my faith. And I need others to see that too. I need to see other people's doubting, grieving, lamenting, questioning faith. A faith expression is not linear, it's not neat, it's not always beautiful, it's not always joyous, but all of that is still faith. And just like looking at Piccinini's Sky Whales, the longer I've allowed myself to look at my doubt, the less scary it has become. I think both art and faith are at their best when they embrace a spectrum of expression. Oh, oops, I went a bit too far. I also think art and faith are at their best when they are released from the tyranny of expertise. Last year, the Art Gallery of New South Wales opened a brand new, highly anticipated building, the South Building, or the Sydney Modern Project. It was fondly called for a long time. And art nerd me followed along on the whole journey of its building and listening to interviews and watching updates about what artwork was being commissioned, what was going to be in the new gallery, what the different rooms were going to be. This is one of the rooms in the new gallery, a very large room with a very, very, very large table, the biggest boardroom table that you have probably ever seen. And as visitors enter, they take a handful of clay, assorted different clays and colours, and you're instructed to take as long as you need to form the clay into a ball, a sphere, and then just leave it on the table. People make their way around the table, selecting a place to sit on one of the scattered stools. And the table's large enough that you can, just find your own space. Some days it's crowded and you're sitting right next to others, sharing table. People from all over, lots of different people, bringing their thoughts, their memories, their worries, their burdens, their hopes, everything that comes with a person comes to the table. Then all of that comes to the sitting and the making. All of that comes out of their own hands. How can some of that thinking not pass into fingerprint in clay? How can that experience not come into the moulding? How can not even a piece of that emotion come into the form? Of course it does. This artwork is called Archive of Mind. Look at them all those little worlds on the table. The clay balls are left, archived, stores of fingerprints, stores of collective thinking, meditating, unburdening, wondering, an imprint. The viewer, the audience, is the maker. We are the artists. It really challenges that perception of artist as genius, separate, above, the authority on art. It also challenges the idea that museums are for spectating and for not touching things. It challenges the notion that we come to a museum to receive education. Instead, it invites us to be part of the dialogue, to contribute something. That's art released from the tyranny of expertise. One of the major struggles for the art world has been that even though we believe art is an essential human expression and a better way to understand ourselves, each other and the world, our art institutions and establishments, museums and galleries, the very places where people go to engage with art, that expression, they have become ivory towers with white walls and quiet halls where you don't touch and you don't make too much noise and you don't ask a silly question because everyone will know that you don't get it. And you come to an art gallery and someone else will tell you which art is important and what it means and what to think about it. Faith tradition would never do that, right? Art institutions and faith establishments have become or are perceived as gatekeepers of knowledge, exclusive, inaccessible, strange places where people speak their own language. In fact, the art world is actually so full of jargon and insider language that recent studies have confirmed that the way art critics and historians talk and write about art it's so esoteric that it does actually qualify as its own dialect. I actually thought about bringing and reading out a bit of, it was, honestly, it just makes no sense, most of it. There's enough unique vocabulary and syntax and ridiculous. We make up words in the art world, like we just completely make them up. So no wonder so many people feel like they're left out of the conversation. It's the tyranny of expertise. The art world hasn't been very good at including everyone and playing fair. How many female artists can you name? Just really quickly. There'll be a couple in here who do know some female artists, but most of you will immediately think of Picasso and Van Gogh and Michelangelo and Leonardo. Actually, most of you will probably start with the Ninja Turtles. But there are not many female artists that are household names. There are female artists who have been making work for hundreds of years, right across the world. There's always been women artists. I teach art history, and my goal has been to always teach and include as many female artists as male artists. My poor children. I sat down to dinner recently and I was wearing a T-shirt. It was a new T-shirt and my husband hadn't seen it, and it's got a list of female artist surnames: Collitz, Gentileschi, Krasner, Carlo, I don't know who else was on it, Walker, a whole list. And my husband goes, "Oh, is that a new shirt?" And I'm like, yeah. Do you know who? My kids go, "Oh, they're women artists." They knew. I'm like, "Oh, excellent. So can you tell me?" And then we went through, my poor children. They humoured me. They actually knew most of them. They had a lesson at the dinner table. I've got another one that's just Australian female artists too. The art world has done a pretty bad job at playing fair. Actually, I could share a lot of information about this. It's an area that I'm particularly passionate about. But just to give you an insight, this was from the director of the Art Gallery of South Australia. I worked out the math for the Art Gallery of South Australia. My current institution, it would take 72 years of acquiring only women artists to achieve parity across our collections. That's probably true for every encyclopedic collection, and that's a fairly young gallery, really. The art world has largely told a single story, a very white male story. Where have the other voices been? Our First Nations voices, other people that have been overlooked, other people of colour, persons with disability. There has been a very select group of experts, people who have decided that they're the experts who will tell everybody else's story. In the art world and in our faith communities, we have to recognise that we have more to learn than we have to teach. My favourite book of last year was called The Future of the Museum, and it's a collection of interviews with 28 art museum directors all over the world. Most of the interviews took place during lockdowns, while galleries had to really stop and think about the purpose of art institutions. What are we here for? The pandemic exposed operational and reputational issues, the murder of George Floyd, the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement. They shone a spotlight on systemic racism in galleries, in collections, misrepresentation, underrepresentation, sexism in the galleries, ableism in the art world, exclusion. There is a lot we have to learn. There has been a tyranny of expertise where only a few people have been able to be the authority on everyone else's stories. The book was profoundly encouraging to me because it was about leaders who were willing to acknowledge the weakness and take risks to try new things, to become more inclusive, to become polyphonic, to be able to become centres of dialogue, not keepers of knowledge. Galleries and curators and art directors have been conserving objects for a long time. But there has been a shift to recognise that we're not about objects and collections, we're about people and stories, connections and conversations. So are faith communities. We're not about collecting beliefs and protecting teaching. We are about people and conversations. We have more to learn than we have to teach. Another favourite book of mine, Museums as Agents of Change by Mike Morawski. He says, yes, museums are largely institutions that hold, preserve and exhibit objects and collections, but they're also living institutions that serve a powerful role as active spaces for connection and coming together, for dialogue, difficult conversations, for listening and sharing, and for care, healing and repair. Museums have the potential to tell new and diverse histories, amplify marginalised voices, celebrate unheard stories, recognise the creativity, knowledge and expertise and lived experience that is already thriving in their local communities. They can be spaces for justice, growth, struggle, love and hope. Now is the time for us to become change makers and realise the potential of museums as transformative spaces of human connection, care, listening and deep learning. That actually sounds like a faith community that I want to be part of. He's describing an art museum, but that's the faith community I want to be part of. When I think of the tyranny of expertise, I always think of Nicodemus, bless him, the most learned man who had read all the right books, a member of the Jewish ruling council. He was the authority. And he's stuck wrestling with his position of knowing it all and being the gatekeeper and conserving a particular kind of story. We know that he comes to Jesus and Jesus says, well, you've got to be born again. And Nicodemus's first question, it's in John chapter 3, you can go and read it. He says, hang on, but how can a person be born again? He doesn't get it yet. And then Jesus goes on and he says, well, we've got to be born of water and spirit. Flesh gives birth to flesh. The spirit gives birth to spirit. You shouldn't be surprised at what I'm saying. You must be born again. He starts talking about the wind blowing. And then it's verse 9 that does it for me. This is my favourite part of the whole passage. I know Jesus says some important things in here, but honestly, this bit from Nicodemus in verse 9, he says, how can this be? At this exclamation, how can this be? This is the moment. This is the release of the tyranny for Nicodemus. This isn't the point where he gets it. He still doesn't get it. This is the point where he realizes that he has more to learn than he has to teach. He realizes he doesn't know. That's when his world opens up. That's when our world opens up. Art and faith are at their best when they are released from the tyranny of expertise. Art and faith are also at their best when they curate what matters most. I first saw Paper Armada, this work by artist Alex Seaton, in his exhibition at Newcastle Art Gallery in 2017. It was part of a broader exhibition called The Island, which was a collection of installations mostly made of marble, drawing attention to the refugee crisis, the perilous journey of asylum seekers, and Australia's abhorrent record of ill treatment of refugees, turning back boats, illegal detention. He carves in marble strong and beautiful, excessive but weighty. It's a difficult material to work with to tell a difficult story. In an interview with Sarah Sweet, he actually says this. Oh, I've gone too far. Did I put it in there? I did. No. Yes. A true act of reverence for art isn't... No, that's not even the one I wanted. I must have left it out. My apologies. I'll read it to you. In an interview with Sarah Sweet, he says, marble has always been associated with privilege and can speak directly to notions of class and hierarchy. As a medium, it has a long history in recording the times and challenges of the day. Creating a marble memorial to an ongoing tragedy is a way of drawing attention to the current humanitarian crisis. Paper Armada, a mandala of paper boats. It looks fragile and impermanent, delicate. They really actually do look like paper until you get closer and realise that they're weighty and they would not float. A fleet of ships, a fleet of people. They look a bit like playthings. They make me think of children on boats. They are not playthings at all. They are heavy. And they circle around, beautiful and arranged. Artists using art as resistance and protest is not a new thing. We can go back to the 1600s in Western art history and look at the work of Artemisia Gentileschi, an Italian painter who paints an incredibly gruesome painting of Judith slaying Holofernes, presenting the power of woman in response to her own experience of being tortured in trial after she was raped. Or Picasso's Guernica, one of possibly the most famous anti-war paintings in history. Or Yoko Ono's groundbreaking cut piece performance of 1964. I could go on and on and on. Artists have been doing this for a long time, drawing our attention to the most important issues. Curators do this too. They carefully select, sometimes leave things out, bring artworks together in a particular way with intentionality, choosing some artworks to get more display than others and thinking about how they relate to each other. We now talk about this as curatorial activism. There's been problems in the past with how things were curated, who was left out, a focus on connoisseurship, who was the author, the timelines. But now, curators are drawing our attention to the things that matter most and drawing links for us between love and loss and hope and power, using art to address climate change, sexism, racism, homophobia, and things that we want to celebrate too as well. Socially engaged art that helps us relate and see ourselves. Can we curate our faith and our centres of worship to do the same? I think we can and we should do the same with our faith. We can select and highlight and give prominence to some things, to certain aspects of our faith, to particular beliefs. I think that there are parts of our faith that are more important than others that I want to give pride of place to. In Matthew 23, Jesus rebukes the Pharisees for tithing on the mint and the dill and the cumin and says that they had forgotten the weightier matters, which were mercy and justice. He also said there are two greatest commandments. He said these ones are more important. Love God and love each other. So it's just love and love. So really it's just one. It's just love. Paul said the same thing. Faith, hope and love. The greatest of these is love. So just as a curator selects work, positions work in such a way that allows the artwork to speak to each other and highlight certain things, maybe we can do the same thing with our faith. Edit, curate, highlight the things that matter most, and then make links and connections in the room to highlight the ideas and how they interact with our world. Like how Sabbath can actually be a demonstration of love for a planet at rest. Or, anyway, I'm not going to start on this. Is a whole other sermon. Some of you have heard that sermon. You might have noticed that each of the artworks I selected today have a collective or cumulative element. I'm a sucker for pattern and repetition in art. It's my favourite thing. Piccinini's Every Heart Sings was incomplete until Skywell Papa was added. It needed two. The meaning and the reception of the work completely changed when there was more than one. Archive of Mind would be pretty useless if the artist had just made one clay ball and put it on a giant table. The artwork is fabulous because of the repetition and scale. And Alex Seaton could have just presented one paper boat, one paper marble boat, and there still would have been great meaning and symbolism in it. But he actually said that he wanted the work to be about the power of community and what happens when a whole fleet comes together to be able to make a difference in the lives of asylum seekers. The most wonderful thing that I am holding on to in my faith, one of the most wonderful things that I'm holding on to in my faith, is the collective that we get to be part of. The cumulative effect of my faith community. An armada, an archive of mind, or a peculiar family. When we're released from the tyranny of expertise, when we recognise that we have more to learn than we have to teach, when we curate our faith and pay attention to the things that matter most, love, hope, peace, justice, respect, we then have collective momentum to enact real and beautiful change in the world and create a museum of heaven.